Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Um, Imam, Mufti, right?
Yeah.
Mufti Owais, welcome to uticamasjid. A lot of times in social media, people often, they have like, social media influencers or people they follow, or like when they have questions about relating to the deen, they just look up things on Google and like Islam Q&A and stuff like that when they don't know what the rulings are regarding a certain situation, and what are the appropriate steps one should take when it comes to specific rulings and asking questions. All right. Before we get to the subject, I want to ask you, what is the difference between a mufti, an imam, and a sheikh?
Okay, so in our context, when we say mufti, it refers to someone who studied fiqh in more depth. So that is what a mufti. And in the Ottoman Empire, it would refer to someone that would issue verdicts. In our context, it refers to someone who has studied fiqh in more detail and is able to convey the correct the ruling, which has been already given by the classical scholars.
Alhamdulillah. So you being a mufti then, what is fiqh?
So fiqh is, in simple words, is the shara, is a commentary, is the explanation of the Quran and the Sunnah. For a Muslim, Islam is to obey Allah and His Messenger alone. And in fact, even the loyalty that we have to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is only because it's a part of the loyalty we have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ati Allah wa ati Rasul, obey Allah and His Messenger. So when it comes to how our fiqh rulings derived, the two main sources that we have for fiqh rulings is the Quran and the Sunnah. These are the primary sources. And then you have two secondary sources. The secondary source for fiqh is the ijma', the consensus of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum and the consensus of the other ulama that came after. And you have qiyas, this doing analogy, this analogical reasoning. For example, if the Quran is mentioning that khamr is impermissible, now what ruling do other intoxicants have? That's not mentioned in the Quran or the Sunnah. So qiyas would be to apply a ruling that's in the Quran or Sunnah and extend it to something else. So these are the four main sources, the two primary being the Quran and the Sunnah. And then you have the ijma', the consensus of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and those ulama that came after in every generation, and qiyas, this analogical reasoning. These are the sources of Islamic law.
So since you said it goes back to, starts from Allah, then the Messenger, and then you have the Sahaba and the ulama afterwards and stuff like that. Does that include people today? Can people from today kind of just come up with like rulings and have their own kind of like jurisprudence?
So one very important point is that scholars, they're not giving a new ruling, right? What they are doing is they're interpreting the rulings, interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah. So they're not lawmakers, right? They're kind of like the judges, right? The judges is not making new law. That's something that's done by the elected officials. They're just implementing or conveying the correct message, right? They're applying the laws and conveying that. So that's the job of the ulama. They're not lawmakers, rather they're conveying and interpreting, giving the correct understanding of the Quran and Sunnah.
Right. So for my understanding, a mufti would be somebody who studies the laws regarding, laws of Islam and how we should basically judge between ourselves and how we should handle each situation based on the Quran and the Sunnah that's been passed down from the Prophet and the Sahaba.
Yeah. But generally, you don't have to be a mufti to understand fiqh. Right, fiqh is something that was taught traditionally at a very beginning, elementary age too, right? And your elementary studies, fiqh was taught, and people had an understanding of what the madhab were and what fiqh is. And this is very important to understand that, again, fiqh is not someone is making new laws, it's rather giving the correct interpretation, right? Scholars are not lawmakers, they're just interpreting the law. And there's a need for scholars. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself makes a distinction between the learned and the non-learned. Amongst the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, you have those that were learned, such as the Khulafa Rashideen, and then the three Abdullahs, Abdullah bin Masud, Abdullah bin Abbas, and Abdullah bin Amr radiallahu anh, and Mu'adh bin Jabal, Aisha radiallahu anha. So amongst the Sahaba, you had those which were known for their fiqh and their knowledge. And the other Sahaba, they would go to them and ask them questions when they had. So this distinction, it was from the time of the Messenger between the learned and the non-learned.
So a lot of times when you hear fiqh, you'll also hear the word like madhabs. So usually now the four most prominent ones that we all know about, but a lot of times sometimes people get confused. Like what is a madhab?
Yeah, so a madhab, again, it's a certain methodology that they are following to arrive at a certain conclusion. So for example, according to one madhab, they will accept this hadith based because it fulfills a certain amount of conditions. These conditions that they have in another madhab might not accept that hadith. So based on that, there's going to be an impact in fiqh. So when we think about madahib, and we think about another word which is commonly used is taqleed. Have you heard that word before? Yep. Taqleed. So when we think of taqleed, the following a madhab, following a school of thought, what does that entail? It doesn't entail following them in beliefs. The core beliefs that everyone has, Tawheed, there's no difference of opinion in those. There's only a difference of opinion in these subsidiary laws, these fiqh rulings. So there's going to be no taqleed when it comes to things which are the fundamentals and the obvious. There's only taqleed in those things, for example, which are not clearly mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah. That's one example. There will be a following of a madhab in those masail, right? Those which seem to apparently contradict each other. Those ahadith and ayat would apparently seem to contradict each other. There would be a fiqh approach in that, right? There would be fiqh, for example, in those ayat which seem inexplicit. They're not so clear as what is intended by them. And there will be fiqh when it comes to those nusus which are open to multiple meanings. So Quran and ahadith which have multiple interpretations, there's going to be fiqh involved in that. Meaning one scholar might prefer one meaning based on this reasoning, another scholar might prefer another meaning based on this. There will be fiqh when it comes to those masail that are mentioned, but their hukum is not mentioned, whether it's fard, wajib or sunnah. So fiqh is restricted to these masail. So I'll give you an example to make it clear. One example I mentioned of the khamr. Khamr is impermissible, but does that apply to other intoxicants? Now that's something that fiqh will tell us, right? So based on that, can we do qiyas? Can we apply the prohibition that's in khamr to other intoxicants? That's a fiqh discussion. So for another time fiqh will be applicable will be, for example, in those masail which seem to be contradicting each other. For example, you have the hadith of Wa'il bin Hujr in Tirmidhi. He says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam read غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِينَ فَقَالَ آمِينَ وَمَدَّ بِهَا صَوْتًا, and then he said Amin loudly. And then in the same book, Tirmidhi, you have another narration from Wa'il bin Hujr that says that وَخَفَضَ بِهَا صَوْتًا, that he did not say Amin loudly, rather he said it softly. So this is, again, you have two narrations which seem to apparently contradict each other. So over here, there is going to be fiqh involved, right? So the one mujtahid will give preference to one narration based on this. One mujtahid will give preference to another narration based on certain proofs. So a very common question is that why don't we just accept the sahih hadith and move on, right? That if there's a difference of opinion, why don't we just accept the sahih hadith? So this brings us to the question that what is a sahih hadith? What defines a sahih hadith? What are the conditions? And you'll see, once the conditions are mentioned, you'll see that within those conditions there's a difference of opinion on how you establish those things. So because of that, you will have an impact in fiqh. To give you an example, let me open the example. For example, when it comes to the validity of a hadith, to act upon a hadith, it needs to be sahih. There are 5 conditions that must be present to classify a hadith as sahih. It needs to have a connected chain. It goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The integrity of the narrator must be proved, that he must be a person of taqwa. The accuracy of the narrator must be proved, that he is a person of strong memory, he's sane, mature. And the text and the chain must be free from any error. So this is what a sahih hadith is. So now what does a connected chain mean? Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he says a connected chain is when you have evidence of consecutive narrators meeting each other. thubut al-liqa, that when it's proven that this narrator met this narrator, it has to be proven. And whereas Imam Muslim says that no, it's not necessary that it be proven that this narrator met this narrator. There doesn't need to be some witness that mentions that no, these two met. But he says that imkanul liqa is enough, that there needs to be a possibility of them meeting. So for example, if one person is narrating from another person, it needs to be proven that it's possible for these two people to have met, meaning they lived in a distance from each other where it was possible for them to meet each other. Or he passed away at this time, and yes, it's possible that at this age he traveled over there and met him. It must be possible. You don't need to prove through another witness that they met. So there's a difference in the approach that Imam Bukhari takes and Imam Muslim takes in regarding what is a connected chain. So you can see from that, you're going to have an impacted fiqh. How will that impact come? Is that one mujtahid, one expert, might accept these ahadith because they fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari with thubut al-liqa, and derive rulings from those ahadith. Right? Whereas he may reject those ahadith which do not fulfill that condition. If you take Imam Muslim's condition, which is just imkanul liqa, that there needs to be a possibility of them meeting. So he may reject those ahadith and not derive rulings from them because it doesn't meet his condition. Whereas another mujtahid might take Imam Bukhari's approach, and then he's able to take those ahadith that fulfill this condition, and then it fulfills the above condition, and derive rulings from both ahadith. So sometimes in the methodology, there's a difference of opinion in the methodology, and that impacts fiqh. Another difference of opinion can come with regards to mursal ahadith. A mursal hadith is when the sahabi is omitted. So Tabi is narrating something. He said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this. He's not mentioning the sahabi, but he's mentioning that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this. So would you accept a mursal hadith? So there's a difference of approach. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, they say that it's reliable. A mursal report is reliable. Why? Because these are the best of generations narrating. So even if they omit the sahabi, it's understood that they took it from a sahabi and they're narrating it forward. Whereas Imam Shafi says that mursal ahadith will be accepted only if it meets these 5 conditions. It's supported, for example, by another musnad connected hadith, or it's supported by a saying of a sahabi. Right? So there needs to be other evidence to accept the mursal hadith. So again, the methodology, right, is going to impact fiqh, right? If we go by group 1's methodology, they will accept more ahadith and will be able to derive more rulings from those. Whereas if we go by group 2's analogy, they might reject some ahadith because it doesn't fulfill the condition, and those ahadith will not be suitable for them to derive ahkam rulings from them. So the difference in methodology when it comes to another condition, when it comes to sahih ahadith, is that the narrator must be adil, upright, righteous, a person of taqwa. Now, how do you define a person who's righteous? There's a difference in methodology. One group will say that to prove adala, trustworthiness, there needs to be testimony by people that this person is a trustworthy person. Another group will say no, there's no need for a testimony. There must not be any criticism made against him. That is sufficient to make him to say that he's adil. So again, because of the difference of approach in the methodology, that's going to impact which ahadith you accept, and because of that, fiqh will be impacted. So the fiqh is impacted because of a difference in the methodology, right? And also fiqh is impacted because many times the ahadith, they're riwaya bil ma'na. To understand that the Quran is riwaya bil lawth, that whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whatever was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he conveyed that exact same thing, right? And the words are unchanged, right? Whereas when it comes to the ahadith, whatever the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the Sahaba conveyed those ahadith forward, but they conveyed it in their own in their own words. They didn't convey word to word what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. This is called riwaya bil ma'na. So it's possible that you have one narrator that narrates it with this word, another narrator narrates it with a different word, and because of that, that impacts fiqh. So to give you an example of that, you have the narration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Man salla ala janazatin fil masjid fala shay'a alayhi. That whoever prays on a janazah in the masjid, a deceased, there's fala shay'a alayhi, there's nothing against him. Right? Meaning it's a good act, it's a rewarding act, and there's no sin on this person. Whereas another narration again says, Man salla ala janaza fil masjid fala shay'a lahu. Right? The change of the last, there's nothing for him. So the group that accepts the first hadith will say that it's permissible to pray Salatul Janazah in the masjid. Whereas the group that goes by the second hadith, right, they will say it's not permissible to pray Salatul Janazah in the masjid, it must be prayed outside. So because ahadith are riwayah bil ma'na, they're narrated forward, they're conveyed in their meaning. They're not verbatim, word for word, like the Quran, so there's going to be a difference of opinion. And sometimes just the one harakah can change the meaning of the word. Again, when we have the ahadith in front of us, sometimes we have to determine how did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam read this? Right? Did he read it with a dhamma, kasra, fatah? How did he read this word? To give one example to understand this. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Fi kulli sa'imati iblin, fi kulli arba'ina bintu labun." That when it comes to collecting zakat, there's zakat on livestock too. So that person that doesn't pay the zakat on the livestock, the amil, the zakat collector, he's being told that وَمَنْ مَنَعَهَا فَإِنَّهَا آخِذُوهَا وَشَطْرَ مَالِهِ. That whoever prevents from giving it, we're going to take it, and وَشَطْرَ مَالِهِ, and we're going to take half his wealth. Again, we don't have the i'rab in front of us, so this could be read in two ways. This could be read وَشَطْرَ مَالِهِ وَشَطْرَ مَالَهُ, and his wealth will be divided into two, and we will take the better half. So how do you read the words? How are the i'rab? That also has an impact in fiqh.
So based on that, there's a lot of things that take into consideration it makes sense why there are multiple madhabs now, because of what methodology you use to get to the answer, and what systems you use, would give you a different answer, because based on your criteria, you could come to a different conclusion.
Exactly, and that's why you can't take one fiqh ruling from this madhab and another fiqh ruling from this madhab. Why? Because then you're going to be contradicting yourself unknowingly. For example, you took this ruling, which was based on this hadith, which the imam accepted because it met this criteria. For example, let's say it was a mursal narration, and this imam accepts this mursal narration. He accepts that this narrator is adil, for example, whereas the other imam does not accept that narrator to be adil, so he doesn't accept that narration. Or he accepts another narrator to be adil, which this imam does not accept. So now, again, you're contradicting yourself when you take both the rulings, because for that one person, this imam is saying he's not trustworthy, and the other is saying trustworthy. So in one you're taking it, one you're not taking it. So that's why the reason for the difference of opinion, again, is based because of their methodology. How are they arriving at their conclusion?
So how would you go about following a madhab then?
For the layman, right, we have to adhere to one methodology. And these madhahib, right, are the way to approach it. Right? One very common question is that why don't we follow the madhab of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum? Right? And Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he mentions that the Sahaba were ala than us, they were more alam than us, right? They were more knowledgeable than us. So why don't we follow their madhab? It's because their madhab has not reached us in a codified manner. We won't find a book of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu or Umar radiallahu anhu mentioning going through all the abwab of fiqh, from tahara to salah. We won't find that. But when you come to the madhahib, it's been codified, it's been documented, right? The Sahaba radiallahu anhu, again, like any science, over time it gets codified, written down. And that's exactly what happened. So the madhahib, really, the difference of opinion is based on the different madhahib that the Sahaba radiallahu anhu had. It's based on that. The different understanding the Sahaba, the different approaches that the Sahaba had, that is basically what the madhahib are conveying. And it's in a codified manner.
So, like if somebody wanted to study a madhab, like an English person, speaking person wants to study a madhab, what would you say is the madhab that has the most like content translated into English that they can have
any
access?
madhab. right? The four mainstream madhab, right? They're really, they're very easily accessible, and you can find the rulings regarding your, any scenario that comes about. And then you have experts in these madahib that can guide you.
So now when you have experts of two different madhabs, how are the differences kind of resolved? Like if you, like in a community, there is an issue and, you have two different madhabs, one person saying one way, one person says another. How do they solve that kind of...
It's only, again, in the subsidiary laws, right? So it shouldn't be a matter of disunity. If, for example, one person is following a certain methodology, right, at times you may be able to accommodate both, right? For example, for Asr Salah, one madhab might say that Asr time starts at this. Another, Imam Abu Hanifa, says it starts later when the shadow is double at the length. Twice its length. So you could accommodate both. At sometimes you can't. So, but again, even if you're not able to accommodate, just because you're not able to accommodate, that shouldn't translate into disunity.
So, for example, the example that you gave right now, like the Asr time prayer one, Hanafis, they pray late, you said, because they wait until your shadow is twice your length. So does that initiate like the beginning of Salah, or is that like the most appropriate time? Because like, you have the three other, the starting time. But the other three madhabs, they consider when it's your first, like the same length as your shadow, that would be the starting time for them. Okay.
That's the shadow that was there at the zenith.
Okay. All right. So in order to accommodate both, if you prayed at the Hanafi time, it would kind of accommodate for both of them. Is that what you're saying? Like if you wanted to accommodate a Hanafi versus a Shafi, Maliki, or Hanbali.
I'm getting at that, but my main thing is that the difference of opinion we see. For example, one person is saying Amin aloud, one person's raising his hands, the Rafa Yadain. These issues, these subsidiary issues, they're not the fundamentals of our deen. So these things should not cause any disunity.
This is not going to be the difference that's going to cause somebody from either entering Jannah or not, right?
No.
Okay. All right.
But it's very important to understand why these different opinions came about. Is because many times there's misconception, and many times the madhab are labeled as bid'ah, innovations, right? And sometimes it goes to the extent that people that follow a certain school, they're called mushrikeen. They're associating partners with Allah. They're not following what Allah and His Messenger said, but they're following what a person has said. That's why it's important to clarify that exactly what are the madhahib, right? Why? How do we have why is there a difference of opinion? How that came about? How it's the difference of opinion is not because they're making their own laws, right? There's a difference of opinion because of their methodology, and they're all going back to the Quran and Sunnah.
So what if you have a majority, minority is the Hanafi, and then the majority is everybody else, and they want to pray early Asr? Would a person who is a follower of Hanafi, would they be kind of...
In this particular ruling, there's flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So if...
Can the Hanafi person pray early with the, Jama'ah, so that way he gets the benefit? Yeah.
Since if the congregation is following a particular time for Asr, they're following the first Asr one, then in this scenario, there's flexibility, then that Hanafi follower can also follow that time.
Because this is what I was going to ask you. Even all the four madhabs, like even there's more than four, but they all come to the conclusion. They tell you that this is not like mandatory, that you have to follow this. That if you find a hadith that's stronger, just follow that. That we're not.
That's also a very common question that all the Imma have said, that إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. If this hadith is sahih, then that's my madhab. Meaning, if you see a hadith, you pick up Bukhari, you see the hadith, and you should follow that hadith, even if it goes against the madhab of your imam. So again, we have to see who we're being addressed. When the imam is saying this, that إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي, who is the audience? And these audience are the other fuqaha, the other experts. It's not for a layman that when you see a hadith that contradicts the madhab, then follow the hadith and leave the madhab of the imam. Because we don't have that in-depth knowledge, right? So let me give you one example. In Bukhari, the hadith comes that Jama Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam bayna dhuhr wal asr wal maghrib wal isha bil Madina fi ghayri khawfin wala matar. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he combined dhuhr and asr, maghrib and isha in Medina, meaning he's a muqim, he's a resident, he's not traveling, and there was no khawf and there was no rain, and he combined. So now we know that you can't just combine all the salawat, right? You have to pray salah in its appointed time. So if I were to just look at that hadith which is in Bukhari and come to my own understanding, okay, if it's a difficult time, if it's difficult, you can combine all your salahs and pray in one time. That would be something absurd. That is a conclusion that has been never said before, that no one has reached that conclusion, right? Again, and why are we coming with that conclusion? Because of our ignorance regarding the regarding the sciences of hadith, how to extract ahkam from hadith, right? So for example, this hadith, what is the background to this hadith? What is the how do we understand this hadith? This is what fiqh will tell us. So Imam Malik rahimahullah, he explains that this was in Medina, when this was in Medina, and what jama over here means is jama suri, not jama haqiqi, not actual combining the two salahs, praying both salahs in one salah time. No, rather this is delaying dhuhr until the end time of dhuhr and then praying asr in the beginning time. So you are praying dhuhr in the end of dhuhr and then asr right at the beginning. So it looks like you're combining, so it looks like you're doing jama, and you are doing jama, but you're not doing jama haqiqatan, you're not praying asr in the time of dhuhr salah. So you would come to many absurd conclusions if we were just look at the hadith. Because another example, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La wuduha min rihin wala la wuduha illa min rihin aw sawtin." That if a person passes wind, he doesn't have to do wudu, except that there's a sound, right? Except there's sound and smell. So if it's silent, a person doesn't have to do wudu. But we know, the understanding that we have is that, which is the correct understanding, if a person passes wind, whether you hear yourself, the sound couldn't be heard, whether it smells or not, a person's wudu break and he has to do wudu again. So then, again, if a person were to just look at this hadith and then start following this hadith, again, his salah would be invalid. Fiqh comes to explain this, right? Fiqh will tell us that no, this was said in a certain context. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking to a person that had wasawis, that would think that my wudu is always getting broken. So to this person he said this, so that he forgets his wasawis, he forgets the whispers that are coming. So just if we see a hadith and that seems to go contradict our madhab that we're following, we should understand that the mujtahid, that the madhab has a dalil which supports the position that it has, even if we don't understand that position, even if we don't have the proof to that, right?
So based on that, we as like laymen or something like that, anybody who's not like a student of knowledge or something like that, can't just take a hadith for face value and just run off with it, right? Because you might not always come to the correct conclusion.
Yeah, and this is not just in our deen, this is in any field. Like when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you have to take this medication, now you're not going to ask the doctor why this medication, even if the doctor told you would not be able to understand, because again, you don't have that background. You don't know if even the doctor told you these are the ingredients in here, you would not understand what that means, right? So you're following someone, right? There's a difference between following someone without proof and without demanding for proof. So this is called deference to authority, right? We're not following them thinking that they don't have any proof. No, we're following them without demanding proof, knowing that they have proof behind what they're saying, right? And the madhab, remember, it's not just one person's judgment, one person's understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. No, in every school you had multiple people that adhere to the same methodology, right? So if there was a lapse by the imam or a hadith missed the imam, right? Like we mentioned, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. If a hadith missed the imam, then there were other scholars of hadith that came in that madhab and rectified those lapses.
All right, that makes sense. What role does ijma, the consensus, play in the development of fiqh?
Ijma is one of the sources of Islamic law, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that لا يجتمع أمتي على دلالة, that my ummah will not be guided, will not gather on misguidance. And how Imam Nawawi and Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, classical scholars, explain this hadith is it means that ummah over here means ulama, that the ulama of my ummah in any era will not come to a batil conclusion, will not come to a incorrect conclusion. So ijma is something we find from the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, but even after that, in every era you had ulama coming, new masail came, new problems came, and there were consensus. That's the ulama of that era had a agreement on a certain thing. So it is a very key thing. And again, the secondary sources of Islamic law, right? They're based in the primary sources of Islamic law. They're based in the Quran and Sunnah.
That kind of makes sense. So the ijma, the consensus, it's not just like a group, like everybody in the community, hey, what do you guys think about this kind of thing? No, it's actually scholars getting together, and that consensus between the scholars of well-learned people who have the knowledge and the background and the proper understanding of the deen to come to that conclusion.
That's why Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says that the consensus, it has to be with ilm, knowledge, right? So you can't ask people that don't have knowledge in that field to come to a conclusion.
So what advice would you have for someone who wants to actually like learn about fiqh or become a student of knowledge?
It's very important to find the correct teachers. It's very important to find the correct teachers. If there's, you have to see that the teacher that you have, right, the opinions that he has, are these the opinions that our classical scholars had, right? And you'll see, it's very important to note that in our history, 1,000+ years, you have the madhab, right? Many of the very well-known classical Islamic scholars adhere to a madhab. Many, and it's only in the last 200 years you'll find people that became non-conformist. They were anti-madhab or no madhab. So, what's very important that the teacher also adheres to a madhab, because again, remember, this is something that has a very big impact on the way a person is going to understand the Quran and Sunnah, right? So it's very important that his understanding is traditional and classic.
All right. So think of it as a scenario where like you're the imam of a community and you have community members who have different madhabs. How would you go about, reconciling issues between them? Like the community members that come together, they want to, they want to do something, or they want to come to agreement on one specific thing, but everybody's like, oh no, we should do it this way. Another group is saying this way. Another madhab is saying, no, we should do it this way. How would you reconcile that?
Generally, the difference of opinions we have in a masjid generally doesn't have to do much with the madhab. What I've noticed is not to do with the madhab. It's to do with, understanding that recently people have came up with, right? It's not like a traditional difference of opinion, as in the madhab, which is based on methodology. It's a difference of opinion based on something which is very recent, right? So it's not really to do with the madhab.
All right. Thank you, Mufti Owais, for coming to Uticamasjid. It was a pleasure. Jazakallahu khair. That was a beautiful khutbah you gave today. You're welcome here anytime. We'd love to have you again.
Jazakallahu khair.